Hello, welcome everyone.
You're gonna mute us also, Karyn?
What was that?
You're gonna mute us all?
I did not mute you all, but you are welcome to mute. Please mute yourselves. It is so wonderful to be with all of you this evening as we welcome Rabbi Karyn Kedar for the third time in the past few months. This evening, Rabbi Kedar is going to talk about how we make, this says make our days count, but how we make teach our children resilience and courage. For those of you who have attended sessions before, you have seen the passion and the engagement and the inspiration that Rabbi Kedar brings to her work. And if you haven't been to one of these sessions yet, you will get a chance to see that. Rabbi Kedar is the senior rabbi at BJBE, and please don't make me say all of those names because I can never remember them. In Chicago, and she has written a number of books, including God Whispers, Stories of the Soul, Lessons of the Heart, The Dance of the Dolphin, Our Dance with God, The Bridge to Forgiveness, and Omer Accounting. Oh, and Amen. And she's an incredible writer and poet, among many things. So thank you, Rabbi Kedar.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hello, everybody. I'm going to wait another second. I see that people are trying to still get in. It would be very helpful if you turned on your video, if that's available to you. I see a lot of people, but a lot of names and no faces.
I will make it so that you will.
Hi, Deb. There you are. Pamela. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks. Appreciate it. So give it another second. I see people are coming on. We're talking today about resiliency and courage in children. And I find it interesting that at least for those of you who I can see, many of you are of grandparenting age. I suppose that this hour is exactly the wrong hour to be talking to parents about children. They are in food. They are in the witching hour, food and bath time and bedtime. And so, in retrospect, we probably, though the committee chose this topic, we probably could have chosen a more hospitable hour for the parents. So if you happen to see this at another time being taped, I apologize for the hour, but grateful for everybody who is here right now. I'm tempted to ask what brings you to this lesson. I see that Stephen Hendler is a parent. I'm a parent too, a parent of 3 children, a grandparent of 5. Happen to be staying with my 4 grandchildren for a week and a half now while my daughter is out taking care of business in Israel. And definitely remember those days. Not easy. We lost a colleague today, a very fine rabbi. So I just got the news a couple hours ago. So I'd like to dedicate this teaching to Rabbi Morley Feinstein, who just one of the good people. You know, when you knew Morley, when those of us who knew him when nobody was looking, knew that he was always just who he was, a fine human being, a kind person, a constant and consistent rabbi dedicated to God and the Jewish people, and taken from us way too soon. So it is traditional in Judaism to honor the memory of somebody by teaching or giving tzedakah. So tonight I'll honor his memory by teaching. And I think he still hasn't been buried. So this is probably one of the first lessons done in his honor. Okay, so feel free to use the chat. I recognize a lot of you are back again from other times that we have been studying together with ideas, with thoughts. I'll go ahead and monitor the chat and read it, and also open it up slightly for discussion. We're a small and mighty group, so we're able to go ahead and do that. I'm going to divide this class, this lesson, and we'll be done by 7 o'clock Central Time. So I guess that's 8 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll be done exactly at an hour. And what I'm going to try to cover is rather simple. First of all, the 3 questions that the children want to know. The 3 rules that a parent must have, and probably one of the only three rules that a parent really should have. 3 dances, 3 spiritual principles, and 1 myth. Did you get that? That's what I'm going to cover tonight. 3 questions, 3 rules, 3 dances, 3 spiritual principles, and 1 myth. And I think as we weave our way through those with questions, we'll end up talking a lot about a value-based parenting, as well as understanding courage and resilience. So what are the 3 questions that a child wants to know? And these are really their abiding questions. And of course, it all depends on how old your child is. Will depend on how they articulate the question and how they'll approach the question. The truth is, it is not only the question that the children want to know, and they absolutely want to know this, but it is the human question of all of us that we want to know. The first question is, am I safe? The second question is, are you safe? And the third question is, why? That's basically what they want to know. When they say, am I safe? What they're asking when they're crying, when they're having a tantrum, when they're acting out, when whatever the child is doing, when they're quiet and brooding, when they're asking the question, am I safe? What they're saying, what they're really asking, and any of us who have been parenting or teachers of children know that the exact question they ask is not always the question they mean to ask. And so part of understanding what a child wants to know is to refine the question and answer exactly what it is that they're asking. So when they say, am I safe? What they're really asking is, will something bad happen to me? I'm scared when you're angry. It feels dangerous to me. It feels like something bad is going to happen. And how do I live with the ambiguity? This question, am I safe, cuts to the underpinning of allowing us to grow up with solid ground beneath our feet. And really, it's the last point that is the most important point for not only for children to understand, but also for adults. Will bad things happen to me? The answer is I really don't know. You could get on an airplane. I'll never forget when I have, as I said, 3 children. They're adults now, but I got on an airplane with one of my children. She was probably under the year of 10. And she said, Mom, what happens if the plane crashes? Right? So she didn't want the answer, then we'll probably die. She wanted the answer, it won't crash. So sometimes when a child feels the uncertainty and the fear, all of us, it's really okay to tell a little white lie just to calm things down. Because the truth is, living in the ambiguity is the most important thing that we can teach the children. Not to give them necessarily the answers to the question, will something bad happens to me? But rather, living in the ambiguity is not necessarily terrifying. We equate ambiguity with terror. Oh my God, I don't know. I don't know. How can I know? How can I control? How can I figure it out? How can I get better? How can I? And the truth is we can't know. But if we can somehow understand that living in the ambiguity does not equate with terror, then we can walk along a path in which there are many things we don't know and we never will know. This correlates to the second question, are you going to be safe? The child wants to know if they're safe, but they also want to know, will you be safe? You may remember yourself being obsessed as a child about, when are my parents going to die? Are they safe? Will they get sick? Will they leave me? Are they fighting? Are they going to leave me? Or if your children are living in a divorce situation, what does that mean when they've left? Have they left me, or have they just left the marriage? And so this sense of abandonment and mortality is the second underlying question. And again, it really goes back to teaching them to learn with the ambiguity, because we don't know. We just don't know. When I was a rabbi so many years ago, at this point, I can't believe it's been so many years, during 9/11, which in the rabbi world happened right before the high holidays. And the world, the rabbinic world, divided in half. Those who gave the sermon they wrote, and those who abandoned the sermon that they wrote and talked about what was going on. Because congregants flocked to synagogues and also churches, basically saying, what the hell was that about? They had one overlying question. Am I safe? Are you safe? What? Why? What was that? And then it wasn't enough to change your Rosh Hashanah sermon. If you didn't address it again on Yom Kippur, people still didn't understand what they were seeing, they needed to figure out what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. And during that period, which goes to the third question, am I safe? Are you safe? Why? I realized spiritual principle number one, the spiritual principle that I had been looking for ever since I was a child, lying on my parents' front lawn, staring at the sky, watching the sunset and the clouds and the sky turn dark, and feeling the prickly grass on my back, and just lying there and lying there and lying there. And though I wouldn't have said it as a young child, what I wanted to know was why, what? And spiritual principle number one is I know nothing. I was pretty sure I understood spiritual principle number 5 and number 7, and I was definitely down on number 36 and 100% sure about number 15, but number 1, I didn't learn until that moment. I know nothing. Because anything we really, really want to know is essentially unknowable. Why do young people die? Why do people get sick? Why do our parents live an old age but suffer in their end? Why do children get sick? Why do some people have love and some people don't? Or even going back to the 9/11 example, why did that man, and I can't get rid of this image, stand next to his colleague who was in a wheelchair instead of saving himself, knowing that he was going to his death? Where did that kind of courage come from? Everything that I really want to know is essentially unknowable. And so in these 3 questions, am I safe? Are you safe? And why? Really what we're trying to learn is how to live with the ambiguity. And that, my friends, is another phrase for faith. We take care of our business and we surrender the rest. And while teaching ourselves how to do that, it's best to teach our children how to at a very, very young age as well. There are things that are simply unknowable. And it's okay. Any questions on those 3 questions and living with the ambiguity synonymous with faith? I could go on, it could be the whole class on that. And maybe I'll come back and teach just a class on that, but there are other threes to get to. Any thoughts, any questions, any comments, any complaints? If something occurs to you as you're going along, then feel free also to write into the chat.
I have difficulty reconciling the ambiguity. I mean, it's easy to say, but it's, number one, it's hard to make someone else feel comfortable in that, and it's sometimes I'm able to reconcile myself to say I just don't know, but it doesn't necessarily give me a feeling of comfort.
Yeah. Right. It's a practice. Everything that I'll be talking about tonight is under the rubric of a spiritual practice. It's not something that I can tell you and you say, oh, okay, I got it, and then move on. From now on, I'll live with the ambiguity, feeling safe here and thereafter. I will tell you, though, for myself, and having been a young parent in Israel, I made Aliyah after ordination and lived in Israel for 10 years and lived through the Intifada and lived through the Gulf War and many terrorist attacks. And so I speak of this, unfortunately, through experience. But one thing that I did learn after 9/11 was not to be afraid of flying, because I was afraid of flying because I thought, well, maybe the mechanic wasn't good, or maybe the plane was old, or maybe the pilot had a fight with his wife, or I don't know what I was thinking. But when I knew that the most likely scenario at 9/11 anyway was that terrorism, that I knew where to put, because I grew up and we're bringing my children up in a situation of constant heightened alert. And I had practiced and learned how to put that kind of fear. Will I be safe? Are you going to be safe? Living with the ambiguity. It's when you make a plan in Israel, they say, nireh, which basically means we'll see. And it used to be very offensive to me as an American. What do you mean? We got to make a plan. We got to make a plan. And they knew, no, you actually don't really need to make a plan. Assuming it'll be okay. We'll see. And that's a whole philosophy on life that is absolutely a practice. So 3 questions while teaching children resilience. Am I safe? Are you safe? And why? Underlying all those questions, learning how to live with the ambiguity. Now there are the 3 rules of parenting. And these are the most important 3 rules of parenting. Again, something I discovered, hopefully not too late. My kids were, around 11 and under. And there were constant fighting in the house. And finally, I had this revelation and I stuck to it, and it changed everything. And that was rule number 1. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. As long as it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't hurt someone else, and it doesn't make you a brat. And I get to decide what a brat is, because I'm the mom. Other than that, sure, I want to stay up till 11 o'clock at night. I don't think that's a good idea, but why don't you go ahead and try that out? And tomorrow we'll talk about how that felt. Yes, I want to go to the swim meet instead of Shabbos services. Okay, I'll be at services. I won't be at your swim meet, but tomorrow we'll talk about how that is. The answer is yes, unless it's going to hurt you, it's going to hurt somebody else, or it's going to make you a brat, because you don't get to be a brat. You have to walk through this world as a mensch, period. And it shifts everything. It shifts the entire conversation around parenting. So rule number 1 is the answer is yes. Rule number 2 is please. But I really mean it. Not, can I have the cookie, please? Please, under the word please, is a dichotomy, a paradox, where we're teaching our children humility as opposed to entitlement. If you want morally resilient children, if you want courageous children, the first step of true courage is to walk through this world with humility. And a person who does not know how to say please, and Rabbi, how many of our prayers of bakashot are asking please to God? That was rhetorical. I'm not really asking her to count. The second you put out to the universe, please, rather than feeling McGilly, I'm entitled. I talked about Israel, so now he was going to come to me. I am entitled to this. It shifts the conversation about your importance in the world. And of course, the third rule is thank you. And thank you is not thank you for the cookie. Thank you is gratitude. So if please means humility, and thank you is living in gratitude, and yes is teaching you empowerment, then really those are the three parenting rules, almost exclusively, after brush your teeth and look both ways before you cross the street. What is the magic world? When the child has forgotten to use it, as if please is the abracadabra to open. Well, pleases, we teach them please is the abracadabra to getting the cookie. But actually what we really want to be teaching is please is the moral and value-based stance of being humble. So 3 questions. Am I safe? Are you safe? And why? The underpinning being living with the ambiguity. 3 rules, please, meaning be humble. Thank you, meaning be grateful. And yes, as long as it doesn't hurt you, somebody else, or make you a brat, meaning be empowered. Thoughts, questions? I see Joe is typing away. Thank you, Joe, for that. Everybody can see. Thoughts, questions, anybody? Okay,
Rabbi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I remember when my son is in his 50s now, but when he was little, I had just tucked him into bed for the night, and he looked up at me and said, "Mommy, you gonna die?" And I said to him, I thought for a second, and I said, "Someday. All living things die someday." And his little lips started to quiver. He was on the verge of tears.
Yeah.
And I said, "But I'll be here when you wake up tomorrow,
Yeah.
and the next day, and we will get through this together." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Oh yeah, you go to sleep now. When you wake up in the morning, I'll be there for you." You know, I don't know if that was the right answer, but it satisfied him.
That's beautiful. That goes along with, is the plane going to crash? What happens if the plane crashes?
That's what reminded me of it.
Right. It's that white lie that gives a sense of security, which is really okay to say.
But I never forgot that.
Very sweet moment. Very sweet moment. Very reassuring. And it plays right into the 3 questions. So 3 questions, 3 rules, and now we're on to 3 dances. Are you ready? And these are your dances, not your children's dances. This is how you dance in the reality of bringing up a child or a grandchild. 1, be there, but don't hover. 2, help them, but don't do it for them. And 3, save them, but let them fail. One, be there, but don't hover. 2, help them, but don't do it for them. 3, save them, but let them fail. Now, let me tell you something about resilience. You can't learn resilience if you don't go into battle. You cannot become a hero of your own life if you don't feel embattled. If your mother or your father is hovering, saving you, helping you all the time, every time, you are crippled and you cannot learn how to pick yourself up, how to bounce back, how to have moral courage, how to fail and get back at it, how to become heroic, how to be mentally tough, even though things aren't right and aren't fair. You cannot learn those things if we as parents protect them to the point where they are smothered and crippled. This is so incredibly important. And people of this generation of parenting, well, they even have a word for it, helicopter mom. You know, this generation of parenting feels that they need to protect and save their children. And of course you need to protect and save your children. Of course you do. But when people are saying, I need to protect and save our children, what you're really saying, if you do it if you go too far, what you're really saying is, I cannot let them hurt. I don't want them to be sad. I can't let them cry. I can't let the teacher be mean to them. I can't let the kids be, I can't stand to see their pain. And so I'm going to hide things from them, rescue them, and not allow them to struggle. Go ahead. Lynn.
So I can remember, I mean, I will say my parents are pretty good about that. They'd say, what do you think you should do? My son, I have to share this. I was a single parent. My son was about 16, 17, and I was out of town for business, and he calls and he's upset, and you have to do this. You have to fix this. And I said, you know, let's take a breath. You're quite capable of figuring it out. What do you think you should do? I did what I thought I should do. I called you. Okay, let's go to plan B. Had to share that.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
The helicopter mom and helicopter dad are essentially making their children into emotional cripples. That may be a little harsh, but those are the only words I can think of at the moment. What thoroughly impresses me about my children and grandchildren is that they're doing all of these things exactly as you say. Two of them, of course, are doctors, but that's beside the point. I've watched them do these things. And it's incredible to see, you know, and I'm one of the funniest episodes. I happened to be at the one house, and probably a year and a half old, who's the second in one family. And he had tossed his toys around and he wanted to do something. And he was being funny in his own way, but he wanted something. And his mother sat down on the floor and said, you have to pick up your toys first. But no. You have to pick up your toys first. And she sat there and smiled at him. And okay. And so gradually over the next 2 or 3 minutes, he picked up one after another. And I just sat and I watched this. It's incredible.
Very
But
sweet.
it worked.
Very sweet. You know, when you're, and it's very fortuitous that I'm teaching this class right now when I'm living with my young grandchildren. It's 3 years old, 4 years old. God help me, 10 and 12 years old, with their mother gone for 9 days. And all the memories of what it's like to be a parent are coming back to me, and how physical it is and how incredibly exhausting it is, and how you just sometimes give in because you just can't any longer. You're just so tired. So it's very easy for me to step on a high horse and kind of shake my finger at you, and I'm not at all. But I will say that if your overriding question is, and my guess is it is because you came into this class, is how do I build resilience and courage in the next generation? The revelation that I had, and I had it pretty recently, I think in 2008, is that heroes are made in battle. It's just really, really hard. It's really, really hard to see somebody that you love, your child particularly, suffer. But the truth is, we can't take away anybody's suffering, nor can we live their life story. That's a little delusional on our part. We think we're saving them by requesting the teacher or getting them transferred so they wouldn't be with this particular kid, or complaining about the grade, or making sure they're in a particular soccer league, or calling the mother to tell them to leave, to tell their kids to leave them alone, or whatever intervention that we're doing in the moment. And life is a tough neighborhood. Life is a tough neighborhood. And the hallways in the school are really tough. They really are. And the one thing that will serve our children best is a mental toughness, is a resilience, is a fortitude, is courageousness. And just look around you right now, having come into this pandemic, having everything that we know and love stripped from us, to be put in a perpetual time out. We sat in the corner for over a year. Every dream that we had for ourselves during this year, every professional ambition, every play, every graduation, every marriage, every way to bury our beloved person, everything we wanted for that great trip that you saved for, anything we wanted to ourselves in an instant went away. And when you look at yourselves and you look at the people around you, particularly now at reentry, which is really sorting things out. Who's entering back with grace? Who's entering back with terror? Who doesn't even know how to come back and needs to be re-socialized? Who's kind of like twitching and flinching every time somebody passes them? All this different, who's judging those people who are re-entering and the way that they're re-entering? Do you believe she goes to a restaurant? Do you believe he won't go to a restaurant? What are the judgments that are happening in us and our circle? When you look at our reaction to how we survived this year with the enormous amount of loss that we've had, and measured against the way that we're tiptoeing back into civilization again, you're seeing the result in yourself and in your friends of resilience and fortitude and courage, of learning to live with ambiguity. You needed those lessons more than ever. We all did. And if you thought yourself to be courageous, which I particularly think that I am, I pride myself on my boldness and my courage. I always have been very courageous, reckless even, high risk, so courageous. Then this is an opportunity to take another layer of learning. Well, maybe I shouldn't be so, I'm older now, maybe I shouldn't be so, what is courageous and what is recklessness? So you're learning another layer and another layer and another layer. And so while this is in the context of this exhaustion of parenting, and in some of our cases, pride in watching our children parent, We know now more than ever, these are the lessons that sort people out. This is it. This is that lesson. We're living it. We get to emerge heroic if we decide to. We get to tell this story in terms of triumph as opposed in terms of failure, if we decide to. Because what was not in our control was the virus and the need of public safety to stay safe and to shut ourselves down. But what is in our control is our character and our value system. And the way that we decided to take this moment and learn about who we are and what we're capable of and what we're not capable of and what's important to us and what is no longer important to us and what needs to stay and what never should ever come back again. And who should never come back again. And who was the surprise? The fellow warrior. So when we look at our children and we hover and we do it for them and we never let them fail, we're not preparing them for this moment. It's the hardest part of parenting. And in this particular case, we can do it alongside them, regardless of what their ages are, 4 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old. Be honest with them. Tell them what you're learning. Tell them how hard this has been for you. Tell them about your disappointments. Tell them about your struggle. This is not just something children do. This is what people do. Tell them what it's like to become the hero of their own lives. What is their superpower? Three dances: be there, but don't hover. Help them, but don't do it for them. Save them, but let them fail. Which leads beautifully into three spiritual principles. Or another way of putting it is 3 words that are transformational. And those 3 words are love, listen, and graciousness. I think when I think about my own self-definitions of what's important and what's not important, and I go back and I say, you know, rule number 3 or rule number 1, you can do anything that you want to do unless it's going to hurt you, hurt someone else, or make you a brat. To me, a brat is a person who's not gracious. That's basically it. Love really, really does conquer all. I mean, it just does, you know. When I decided to go to rabbinic school, I decided to go to rabbinic school when I was lying on my back in my parents' yard at age 8. I was very young. I didn't know women didn't do that. And my parents didn't tell me not that I couldn't. And so I just went for it. But at some point, somebody said, well, what's it mean to be a rabbi? And I said, a rabbi is not a job description. It's an attitude. We actually teach the cliches. So I apologize, not really, for teaching the cliche that love really does matter. Because you know what? Love really does matter. It just really does. And it's really hard to love. It's hard to have your first response be loving. It's hard to sustain a loving response, particularly in the midst of conflict. But if you want to know 3 words that are transformational, it's love. And we have that in our scripture, in our prayers. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And then it says later on, Vishinantam levanecha, which means you shall teach them, in some translations, faithfully or diligently to your children. But that's not really what it means. Lishanen is to teach by repetition. You are loved, you are loved, you are loved, you are loved. Because a person who grows up in the belief that they are loved, is a different person than one who doesn't. And if you yourself weren't given the love that you needed to be given when you were younger, the beautiful thing about becoming an adult is that you have the opportunity to change that reality now, because you are loved. And if you're hanging out with people who don't love you so much, hang out with somebody else, because you're loved. And it makes everything different. And the second word is listen. Not, yeah, I hear you. The second you say, yeah, I hear you, you're not really listening. No, you really don't hear me. Shema Yisrael, that prayer before the Ve'ahavta. You must listen. Yisrael, Israel, you struggler with God. Listen to the God whispers inside of you. Listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. Believe it when you're saying this to yourself, whatever the this is, believe you. Believe you. Listen to your own truth and then teach it. Trust yourself. And then listen to the children. Really listen. Love, listen, and graciousness. It really matters that you're gracious or not. I'm not sure how you would define graciousness, but I define it by a generous point of view, a generosity. So before I go to the one myth, I'll recap. 3 questions. Am I safe? Are you safe? And why? And underlying those questions is learning to live with the ambiguity. Because the answer to all those questions is, I don't know. 3 rules. Please, thank you. And the answer is yes. Please, which means let's be humble rather than entitled. Thank you. Let's live with gratitude in our hearts. Yes, as long as it doesn't hurt you, hurt somebody else, or doesn't make you a brat, and I get to define what a brat is. 3 dances. Be there, but don't hover. Help them, but don't do it for them. Save them, but let them fail. 3 transformational words, or 3 spiritual principles: love, listen, and graciousness. You ready for the myth? It ends with this. 1 myth is what we need to teach our children. Anybody want to guess what it is? Ready? Here it is. Drum roll. The myth is you can do anything that you want. I think I was in my 40s before I realized that was a myth. I actually thought that I could do anything that I wanted. What a credible gift that was, to grow up believing I could do anything that I wanted to do, despite evidence to the contrary, because I failed all the time. One of the books that I'll end up writing someday is The Towns That I've Been Run Out of. I've been run out of many a town. That might get back to this courageous, boldness, risk-taking young person that I was. I failed at a lot of things, and yet I actually had the audacity to think that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And really, when you grow up with that myth, what it's teaching you is abundance versus scarcity. It gives you an abundant point of view rather than a scarce point of view, because the opposite really is scarcity. When you grow up with a lot of can'ts, you can't, you shouldn't, why would you? Really? What are you, nuts? How dare you? Good girls don't say that. Be a good boy. Don't break the rules. No, no, no. It's not nice. Stop. When you grow up with those words and phrases as the abiding message of your life, you grow up thinking that the world does not apply, there's not enough in the world. You grow up believing you can't. But if you grow, and that's a myth too, by the way. The fact that you can't is equally a myth as the fact that you can. So if you're going to make up your reality, if you're going to help your children make up their reality, have them make it up to their advantage rather than to their disadvantage. Growing up with the myth or believing in the myth that you can do anything that you want, or to put it in a more spiritual context, that the universe abundantly provides, allows you to live in the reality of this overflowing sense of love and graciousness and hope and optimism and ultimately resilience, because of all the doors that were closed to me. And as I said, many doors that were closed to me, many, many, many. You don't get to be a rabbi in my generation as a woman without the doors closed to you in brutal ways. Many doors closed to me. If I didn't believe I could do anything that I wanted, I don't know if I would have gotten up again, having been knocked down. It didn't compute. But what do you mean I can't? Of course I can. What do you mean no? Don't say no to me. To this day, my staff knows not to say no to me, but to say, well, that's interesting, Rabbi. Did you consider this? That I'm down with. Just don't say no or can't. It betrays the myth that was my abiding myth, that I believe is the abiding myth of a child, if we get back to the children, who can be heroic. And if we get away from the children for a second and get back to you personally, if you did grow up with a point of view of scarcity, you absolutely have the power to change that. If you believe that the world does not abundantly abide and that there is never enough, then you have the power to decide to see things a different way. But the ability to believe that you can and that it is possible, and why not, and go for it, and let's try. That is resilience. That is fortitude. That is tenacity. Yes, Frank.
A couple things. Number one, with the battle, it's before you go into battle, you really don't know whether you're going to come out whole or not. I mean, David and Goliath, a biblical example. The other thing with your statement about you can do anything you want, is that speaking from a woman in the 20th century or 21st century, as opposed to where our grandparents or great grandparents grew up, where this was much less the case.
Yes, you're absolutely true. It is but again, it's not that I can do anything that I want. I could not be a brain surgeon. I don't happen to want to be a brain surgeon, but if I did want to be a brain surgeon, I wouldn't be able to be a brain surgeon. It's not that I can do everything I want. And particularly now as I'm getting older, look, I'm retiring in 2022. I couldn't apply for my job. Nobody would hire me at age 65. I can't do anything that I want. It's not only a generational thing or a female thing. Of course, you can't do anything that you want. That's why it's a myth. But it's a myth based on a point of view of the world that is hopeful, optimistic, courageous, and abundant. Now, and again, this could be an entire lesson, and indeed it is an entire life point of view. And we don't have time to go into it in more depth, but I will say, I'll say this, because it does sound very privileged, and I don't want you to misunderstand me. I absolutely cannot do anything that I want. If you believe that you have a goal and your goal is over here, but suddenly there's a brick wall in front of you and you cannot get to your goal, you just can't. It is closed to you. You have a couple choices. You can beat your head against the wall. You can dig a ditch and try to go underneath. You can figure out a way to climb on top of it, or you can go like this and look over there. So that failure then, under this perspective, is not, I could do it, she lied to me, I can do everything I want, and look, I can't. This thing I failed. This thing I cannot do. Rather, failure is a signpost that says, look at it a different way. Try this instead. And when you say try this instead, you're living in an abundant point of view, an abundant world. You're not living in a world that that doesn't believe that you can or you can't.
Also, I mean, on the other side, we're raising our children or grandchildren in 2021, not in 1850. So my concern about 1850 is, it's interesting, but it's not today.
It is absolutely true. And if you're using, when I was, I don't know, I'm talking about my age so much today, but when I was younger, how many older women came up to me in sisterhood events or Hadassah events? Since I was the only woman rabbi they ever met. I made the round of Ort and Hadassah, and they would grab onto my arm and they would say, "Do you know how lucky you are? Had I lived in your generation, I would have been a rabbi." They couldn't. Okay, so that's why it's a myth. But because there were enough people who didn't believe in the myth that they couldn't, they created a different myth that why not, I can. And eventually society and history changes. Or not. Maybe it takes a generation. But to go, to not talk about the societal sweeps of it now, but talk about the individual life in which we're living. I would rather live with the belief, err as I might be, that all is open, that the field is mine to take. And then have the agility to figure out when something doesn't go the way that I thought that it should. It doesn't mean I can't, it means it didn't go what I thought. It means I have to be agile in my thinking. So last time, before I take leave, and you can disagree with me because I just made all this up, so what do I know? 3 questions. Am I safe? Are you safe? And why? 3 rules, please, thank you. And the answer is yes, as long as it doesn't hurt you, doesn't hurt somebody else, and it doesn't make you a brat. 3 dances, be there but don't hover, Help them, but don't do it for them. Save them, but don't let them fail. 3 transformative words: love, listen, graciousness, and 1 abiding myth: you can do anything that you want, which really means living in abundance rather than scarcity.
Can I ask? I think that was fabulous. I really enjoyed this tremendously.
Thank you.
I'm a pediatrician, and so I have a short period of time with people repeatedly, and so sometimes I feel like, what am I really going to say to you that can help? So these are very helpful guiding principles that are good. And but parents are so anxious. They so don't want something bad to happen to their child. And I don't know what is there something, and there is the potential to sound kind of preachy. What do you say to skeptical families? Like, what do you mean? Like, not necessarily that you can do anything you want, but I don't know, so much as a parent, you really feel like what your role is to answer the questions, even though the question, and it's like, and I struggle with that too. Like, the kid comes to me and they didn't know the answer. I was like, well, you go figure it out. Well, what the heck? Why do you need a parent at all if all you're going to tell me is go figure it out yourself? So I think there is some balance between recognizing that somebody's coming to you versus just saying, oh, I think you can do it yourself. So I don't know. I'm just kind of looking for, those are, I guess, 2 questions there.
I hear you 100%, even though I just told you never to say that. I hear you.
I felt heard, so you did okay with that.
People are very scared. They say they're afraid for their children, and they are indeed afraid for their children, but they're also afraid for their lives and for themselves. People live in enormous fear all the time. We just do. And I don't know if this pandemic will increase that fear and anxiety. I think that from what I'm seeing, it certainly has in many cases, or to calm it in some cases, depending on how we decided to relate to the pandemic. But I would almost be tempted to say to a parent, what are you afraid of? Not what are you afraid of, but which I don't think you would, but rather, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. What are you afraid of? And then they say, well, I'm afraid she's going to get bacterial meningitis. And you say, yeah, but what are you afraid of? What's your fear? Because which goes beyond the purview of your, 15, 20 minutes with the child, half an hour with the child. But that's really the question we need to say to people, well, what are you afraid of? And if we can ourselves get down to what is the cause, what's the source of our deep embedded fear. I actually believe in the spiritual world, actually, since that's my field of expertise. If I were to have a fear of expertise, ultimately our fear is not being loved, not having enough, not living in an abundant, loving world, which is why it's embedded in what I teach here. If you really pull it away, I'm going to be judged by my peers. I'm going to be judged by my parents. I'm not going to be loved. It's very complicated. We're very frightened.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, anytime, Ken.
Well, I find this helpful as an early childhood educator, because a lot of what we do and what oftentimes parents will be surprised at what their children are capable of doing in our care, because we give them some opportunities that the parents may not, and allow them to take certain risks that the parents may not. So sometimes that's a way to provide a bridge to have that conversation about, what they are capable of or what we do allow. And again, as long as they're safe, as long as they're kind with others, as long as they respect the materials, those are sort of our underlying rules. And then we go from there. And sometimes, as I said, it helps to open up a conversation with parents when they realize certain things that they're doing. Oh, they can sit at a table and drink from a cup. I haven't had them do that yet. I didn't know they could do that.
Right.
Because again, they're just not, and it helps them to build some confidence and, do it not in a judging way, but just in a helpful, sort of supportive way.
Yep, 100%. So true.
I think that's also, just to sort of pull some of the pieces together, that's why it's a dance, right? Yeah. It's not one or the other. It's always sort of navigating which one are you going to be leaning towards at one point and then switching to the other at another point, because that's what's more appropriate. And there's no like real middle ground that you should be in. You're just going to be moving back and forth. I love that word dance. In my education program, we talked about enduring dilemmas. So yes, an enduring dilemma, but I like the idea of dance. First of all, it sounds much more positive, but also it's this idea of sort of always being in motion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rabbi. That's good.
It's always learning. That's the dance. We're always learning. We're trying to.
I also see of looking at it, you were talking about the pandemic and how we are dealing with it, of the glass half full versus the glass half empty. And, there was lots that I personally had to give up this past year, but there were lots of, there were other things, and I'm not trying to make myself into something special, but just how we are able, or how we learn, and maybe some of what you were teaching us, just how to find the glass half full.
Well, actually, what I say, and I'm so glad you brought that metaphor up, because when we go to say Kiddush, I don't know if in your synagogue or in your house you have like a little plate underneath your Kiddush cup, or you were ever offered to buy that. The reason why there's a plate there is because they're supposed to fill the wine up to the very end, and it's a little bit spill over, so it spills over onto the plate. So in Judaism, our glass is not half empty or half full, but overflowing. And so that is the image when you talk about living in an abundant world rather than a world of scarcity, that it's changing the metaphor. How do I live in overflow? Well, I promised to end on time, and I think I'm a little over time. I really have appreciated coming to your congregation and getting to know some of you multiple times, have come back again. Really appreciate that, and look forward to winding my way out into your neck of the woods someday and actually meeting you in person. Thank you. But thank you very much for the opportunity to teach you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is great. Thank you, Rabbi Corbin, for